Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I'm joined, I'm going to be co-facilitating today with Annika, who will introduce herself shortly, and also Rachel from Dusseldorp Forum, who's been an incredible partner in this work. So what we're talking about today, the focus of today's circle, is storytelling forms and traditions. And the reason that came up as a theme is because when we were doing the research into the first report, one of the things that sort of really struck me was the idea that stories don't need to be written, and they don't need to be written, and they don't need to be oral either. Stories can be many things. So in the report, one of the things that we heard from people is that stories can be recipes. Stories can be locks, you know, those collection of locks on bridges. Stories can be songs, they can be dance, they can be many, many things. And I think that expansion of my understanding of how you access a story, someone said that a recipe can be a story, which I just thought, even as I say that, I get goosebumps a bit because, you know, eating people's food that tells their story can be such a powerful way of communicating messages, insight, and you know, and powerful, I guess, reflections that in ways that transcend the written or the spoken word. And so part of what we want to do today is explore that idea. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do we access stories beyond the written or spoken word? As always, we want this session to be part discussion about ideas, but also a sense for you to sort of really practically start to apply some of these concepts. Like what might that actually mean and look like? So again, we've got two components of the session today. The first bit is going to be more discussion. And then the second bit, we're going to hear from Natalie, who's going to be talking to us about a practice that you could experiment with that takes stories beyond the written or spoken word. But also we want to, you know, make sure that this space is an opportunity to connect, to sort of switch modes a bit. Like I'm sure you're all coming from busy days and lots of Zoom meetings. And so I'm really delighted to invite Michelle just to take a couple of minutes to ground us in this conversation and to help you sort of switch modes from the busyness of the day into a slightly different zone of conversation. So Michelle, I'm going to hand to you now.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me? Great. So I'm going to talk us and walk us through a grounding practice in deep listening, which also includes an invitation to our ancestors. I understand that for some of us, we have unclear and perhaps even problematic relationships with our ancestors, yet we also know that any one single story cannot define or describe all that occurs in time and in life. So I'm going to invite you to find a position that feels grounded and open. This will take around about 4.5 minutes. You might want to switch your camera, whatever it is that helps you to feel safe and comfortable. Find a position that feels grounded and open, seated or standing. Let your feet connect to the earth beneath you. And this might require you to feel the connection between you and the floor or the ground, and move with your mind's eye through the layers to the deep earth beneath your feet. Close your eyes or lower your gaze. And we're going to begin with our breath. Inhale slowly through your nose. And exhale gently through your mouth. With each breath, feel yourself arriving. Encourage your awareness to settle downward out of your head and into your body. I am here. I am safe. I am listening. You might think of your breath as a thread of fabric, of cotton or grass or raffia, weaving you into this moment, this place, this lineage of breath. Now, invite your ancestors, those of blood, of spirit, of land and tradition. You may know their names, or you may not. Imagine them standing behind you, maybe placing a hand on your shoulder, whispering, "We are here." Let their presence remind you that you are not alone. Take a few intentional breaths here, in through your nose and exhale out through your mouth, grounded in the support of those who walked before you. Whether to words, the wind, or silence, let yourself listen as if your ancestors are listening through you. What are you hearing that isn't just sound? Let your body listen. Let your breath listen. Let every part of you receive, not just with your ears, but with your heart. What do you hear? Is there an image, a feeling, or words? What wisdoms might your ancestors want you to carry forward today? Bring your hands to your belly or your heart. Offer silent thanks to your ancestors, to your body, your being, to the breath, and to the stories that came through. I listen, I remember, I carry forward. When you're ready, gently return to our space. Maybe you'll carry the stillness and strength of those who walked before.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle, for that really beautiful, beautiful grounding, and for connecting us to the space. And welcome everyone. It's so lovely to see all of you again at our second session. Today, as Sia said, we're going to explore the forms and traditions of storytelling and how these various ways of storytelling might relate to systems change. And thank you so much, Michelle, for opening us up to deeper listening, and ways of really connecting to the body that open up, being in a place to really receive stories. Today I'm so excited to welcome our speakers. to this session on storytelling forms and traditions. One of our speakers will be Michelle, who's just taken us through that beautiful grounding practice. Michelle is a narrative practitioner at Time Space and works a lot up in the Territory and in Newcastle, and has worked for many years on systems and with a focus on people with disability in particular. We also have Brent Ryan, who's the Director of Communications at the Yoorrook Justice Commission. And Brent has very kindly agreed to join us all the way from Port Fairy, where he's participating in the very long walk that Commissioner Travis Lovett is doing over this week and next as the Yoorrook Justice Commission wraps up its work here in Victoria. I'm also very excited to welcome Ima Abdulrahim and Abdulrahman Malik, who are joining us from Jakarta and New Haven, respectively. And Ima and Abdulrahman work at the Caravanserai Collective, where they use storytelling in different contexts and in different ways in their really exciting work in Southeast Asia and around the world. So I'm really excited to welcome you all. And just to get us started and to ground everyone in their understanding of your work, I guess the first question for the panel is how do you use storytelling in your work, and what objectives does it aim to achieve in your context? So, Michelle, I might start with you to explain a little bit about the importance of stories in your narrative practice and what the use of stories really tries to achieve.
Thank you, Annika. It's great to be here with everybody. Well, some of you may know this thing called narrative practice, narrative ways of working. What I can say about the ways in which I use storytelling, I think it needs to start with, I guess the areas in which I work usually are very complex contexts, people who live with and continue to experience significant trauma impacts. And so the stories are often deeply personal, yet always connected to the life and the social constructs that exist outside of us as individuals. And so I work with individuals, I work with family groups, and I also work with community members. What we're really trying to do is support people to think about the story of influence, or the problem stories that are impacting their lives, are taking up space in their lives and influencing their lives or the lives of a community. But the individual and the people are not the problem, which is a main principle of narrative ways of working. And when we center people as experts in their own lives, and view problem stories as separate to them, we can hold space for skills, competencies, abilities, and importantly, values to surface and become more known to the individual or the family group or the community. It might seem trivial that, in very, very serious stories and serious experiences that we are talking about developing stories, but actually we know that conversation can help to shape new realities for people. Yeah, leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle. I think it's a really nice segue into Brent and some of the work you've done at Yoorrook and talking and thinking about the power of individual stories. So what role has storytelling played in your work at Yoorrook, and what is the overall objective of using those stories in your work?
Thanks, everyone. I'm grateful to be here. I also have some laryngitis that I'm
battling with, so hopefully you can hear me okay. I just want to acknowledge as well that I'm on Peak Wurrung country under the broader Eastern Maar peoples down here in Port Fairy. So I just want to acknowledge them and their leadership. They've been really grateful, sharing significant sites that mean something to their people, whether it be massacre sites, mission sites, or sites of significance. So I just want to call that out and acknowledge them while I'm down here in the hotel room today. And yeah, just really quickly, I think it's important before I talk just to acknowledge who I am as well, and who I am. And so I'm Brent Ryan, a muddy man on my mum's side and Irish on my father's side. Mum's nan was an Aboriginal woman that grew up in Balranald in New South Wales, so just over the border there. She married a white fellow called John Bullman, and they moved to Redcliffs in Victoria just after World War One, where a lot of the white returning soldiers were getting allocations of land, those 5-acre land blocks, and yeah, great grandmother and pop just kind of hustled and did their thing, and then mum was born in Preston in a commission house, youngest of 7, in the 50s. So that's kind of how I've made my way down to Naarm or Melbourne. And I'm not sure what people know of Muddy people, but with the Barkindji and the Nyampa people, we share a real significance of Mungo and Mungo National Park. So I'm not sure if anyone's been. I was fortunate enough to finally get there last year, but Mungo Woman in 1969 was found by a kind of a white scientist, Jim Bowler, and Mungo Man in 1974, 500 metres east of where Mungo Woman was found. And the science behind that talks to them being 45,000 plus years old. So we often hear people say, you know, we have the oldest living culture in the world in Australia with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but to be kind of scientifically credited is really important for our people. And then also just to hear when I was there some of the kind of ancient ceremonial practices as well. So Mungo Woman was cremated in a respectful way, and then Mungo Man with his arms across with red ochre splashed on him, you know, just shows that traditions that have continued for thousands of generations. And probably what stood out for me was the ochre, the red ochre that was sprinkled on Mungo Man didn't come from that area. So they said it was 250 kilometres away. So it just goes to show when we talk about neighbouring mobs and clans with trade and working harmoniously and ceremony and those kind of things, that it's a real thing. And to see it tangibly applied over that longer period and have a connection to that area is really special for me. So their remains were taken off once they were found and used, as often, unfortunately, our people's remains are used for research purposes, and they were returned to country, Mungo Woman in 1992 and Mungo Man only 7 years ago. So they're back on country, looked after by the TO groups, which is really important. So I just want to acknowledge, where my people come from and Mungo, if those haven't heard of it. And I just, professionally for me, was fortunate enough to teach at Parkville College. So our kids in custody in Victoria for 5 years and learn a lot from the young people and the strength of the trauma that they bring into their lives. And then at VACA in the child protection space. So I was really fortunate to see probably on the ground level some of the challenges in the justice and out of home care systems. And then for those who don't know much about Yurok, I'll talk about it in a little bit, but it's looking into systemic injustice for our people into a variety of different themes. And we finish up on June 30, so just over 4 weeks away, and there's a series of reports and websites and information that I'll share later on that people can engage with before we finish. But so we're the first formal truth-telling commission in Australia with Royal Commission powers, and we hand our final report to the Premier, like all Royal Commissions, but we also hand our report to the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, the treaty mob that people might have heard about. Obviously, Australia is the only Commonwealth country without a treaty with its First Peoples, and there's some really significant progress happening at the moment. So there's a statewide treaty being kind of negotiated at the moment, and that'll come to fruition later this year. And then yesterday there was an announcement from Jara mob, so up near Bendigo in Victoria, that they're ready to go to the table and negotiate their own individual treaty with government. So it's really exciting space. It's really tangible, and it gives us hope at Yurok that our recommendations will get through and will be embedded, unlike probably, your deaths in custody and bringing them home reports. So I thought it was also probably important just to speak and tell a story of who I am and what I do, rather than just probably say my title is Director of Engagement and Comms at Yuruk. Probably people in the call are aware that storytelling, is very strong and poignant in an Aboriginal community. We have a yarn, we share generously, and that probably we often don't record our stories. So they're told, as someone said before in the acknowledgement and the introduction about Rec Week, through dance is how a songline's told, or through a yarning circle is where information's passed down. And it's probably a balance of that walking in two worlds, where we probably rely on. I've just got some Mungo language, a book given to me from a community member, that it's great to see some language written down from a linguist. And a lot of the times the linguists are non-First Peoples that are helping us on that revitalisation journey. And we all know about colonisation and what was taken from us. So to summarise Yuruk more broadly, and I'll talk about later about how we receive evidence and maybe some powerful ones that have stood out for me. We've received over 1,500 bits of evidence from First Peoples members, so submissions in a variety of forms, and talk about maybe how we hope to shift some systems with that as well. So I might leave that there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brent, and also for sharing with us the power of story and just listening to your own family story and the connection to the bigger story of Mungo man and woman, just kind of highlighting for all of us listening to that, the power of storytelling. So thank you. Imma and Abdulrahman, if you want to speak to the ways you use storytelling in your work at the Caravanserai Collective, and what objectives you're trying to achieve. I'll leave it to you to tag team.
Okay. Thank you so much, Annika. We're so honored to be here again, just listening to Michelle and Brant and the amazing work that you both do. And I'm sure when you hear from others who are on the call, I think it definitely adds to my knowledge of how storytelling is being used, especially in such for the peoples that you serve and that you work with. For us, at the Caravanserai Collective, myself and Abdurrahman, there's a third person in our trio, who's in Lisbon time zone, so he's fast asleep. But for us, we started actually. It was me calling out to Abdurrahman and Stephen because I was concerned about my own country. I am Indonesian. I am from in 2016, 2017, we really saw a very big shift in Indonesia, in the way people looked at identity, and we've always been proud of this motto that we have of being united in diversity, but there was very clear cracks happening, and we felt that people were not knowing each other better, and it then went on social media, and polarization happened, and a lot of it, of course, was because of politics. And I was very concerned, and with Abdurrahman and Stephen, we ended up doing our first prototype actually in Indonesia, using storytelling to unite people, to bring people together, for social cohesion. We lean very heavily on different frameworks. One of them, Professor Marshall Gans at the Harvard Kennedy School, using his public narrative framework, and then of course Theater of the Oppressed as well, which Abdurrahman will be talking about a little bit. But that's how we use storytelling. We believe that stories are the most natural thing. Storytelling is the most natural thing that people do. But one of the things that we focus on is to make sure that stories are nothing without storytellers. And so we do focus so much on the storyteller and how they are able to then tell their stories. Abdurrahman?
Thank you so much, Iman, and thank you, friends, for having us in this space, and thank you particularly to Michelle and to Brent for those beautiful and important opening remarks, giving us a context of where we're coming from. I was born in Toronto, Canada, so there's a Commonwealth connection. We are all inheritors or victims of some kind of colonization, and so those that kind of lives strongly in my own story, having come from a Punjab which was divided, and my family moving from the Indian side of Punjab to to the Pakistan side, and then becoming these kind of diasporic families. And it was really within that kind of diasporic context that Ima and myself and our colleague Stephen came together. Ima is from Jakarta. I'm, Pakistani Canadian. The third in our group is Iraqi Jewish from Montreal, and we all ended up meeting in New Haven, Connecticut, back in 2015. And a year and a half later, we were working in 5 conflict cities in Indonesia, where there had been intercultural and particularly interreligious conflict, as Ima said. A time of kind of great tumult and concern within Indonesia. And I think what Ima didn't mention is that Ima led for nearly 20 years an organization called the Habibi Center, where she and her colleagues were actively engaged in generating data and monitoring the ways in which identity politics, religious fracture, ethno-linguistic fracture was actually playing out in real communities with real human beings. And I think when we came together to talk about story, I think we were all really tired, as I'm sure all of you are, of the ways in which talk about narrative and story is sort of hijacked in particularly corporate cultures, in our, large humanitarian organizations. Stories are really considered utilitarian, right? To engage with a broader political or corporate or other agenda. And I think what we found was that, and what we were sort of drawn to was, as Ima said, that there's no stories without the storytellers. And often, even in, so-called humanitarian or social justice or nonprofit or service environment, stories were being taken away from those who were telling them and being utilized in a way that perhaps they didn't want them utilized. And I'm sure, Brent, in your work with Indigenous communities in your own community, you have a strong sense of that, of stories being taken from people and utilized for broader agendas. So from the very beginning, when we thought about story, it really was, how do we strengthen the storyteller? There is no story without a storyteller. Someone's telling the story.
Yeah.
Stories don't exist, without like on their own. And so our work has really been about, as Ima said, engaging with the storyteller, engaging with the storyteller as a full and whole individual. And in some ways, the truth is, and I think we all know this, that we are all a collection of stories. It is through story and narrative, our own, that we connect with with each other. And the telling of stories and the mechanics of telling of stories is like our friend, the futurist Mark Gonzalez, says, is really the first empathy technology, right? When we think about the Mungo man or the Mungo woman in the communities that they lived in, we can imagine what it would look like to sit in story circle, to have this sense of telling our own narratives, of being listened to, of being heard, of stories being the manna and the vehicle by which we build deep empathy and care and concern for one another, and communicate the deepest of our emotions. And finally, just to say, Annika, that as we deal with real bona fide evidenceable crises and social fractures. I'm in the United States, and this is a constant theme here and in Australia and Canada and elsewhere. The idea that our societies are growing ever more fractious, and we often speak about in silos, and often these are silos of stories and narratives that ping off one another. How do we as individuals who believe in the power of the storyteller to tell their own story, create the right environment, the right terrain, the right space in which story meets story, and we can break a silo, but also build new connections. And that's, I think, what we've been trying to do, is build those new connections, and it's been powerful and rewarding work.
That's incredible. And I guess it also speaks to what we're trying to do here as well. in this circle and in gathering the people who are here and all of our speakers is really to break those silos and people using story in different contexts, but really to see the threads. And what's so beautiful about this panel and all of your work is really seeing the kind of the threads, the threads that belong to kind of all of humanity in a way. You know, you're all working in such different contexts. I want to drill down a little bit more into, you know, the forms of storytelling and the ways that story can be told. So, a few of you have already kind of alluded to that. So, Brent, you were saying, you know, the way songlines are communicated and oral story traditions, you know, often a challenge with that kind of storytelling is that it's not written down, there's no record. You know, Ima and Abdul Rahman, I know you do. I'm really interested in, and we'll get to this really interesting work around the theatre of the oppressed and what does theatre as a medium do that helps people, you know, connect across those divides. And Michelle, I know in your work, you know, you use all kinds of creative mediums to help the people you work with really tell those stories and to divide, you know, separate themselves from that kind of problem narrative. Brent, I think I might start with you. So I'm so interested because one of the key features of your Rook, you know, obviously people were telling their stories in their traditional kind of Royal Commission legal format in terms of oral testimony, but there were also lots of mechanisms to allow people to tell their stories in their way. So using poetry, using you know, painting, using or whatever it might be that might help them tell their stories. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to some of those forms of the ways that people told their stories to your Rook, and what some of the strengths and challenges were around using those different storytelling forms.
Absolutely, and love hearing the other panelists. There's so many kind of synergies and reference points that we've gone through as well. So I think you're right, Annika. Like forms of storytelling can look different, and you know, ideally it's guided by the participant, right? Like ideally, the community that you want to listen to or hear from, you tailor an approach to work for them. So yeah, everyone would be aware. Like traditionally, a royal commission is a lot of hearings, and that's in our office, a round table, lawyers, suits, lights, cameras, action, all that stuff. And there's a time for that. We found it was helpful at times to, you know, when we were grilling ministers or bureaucrats to have them in there, but they also feel really comfortable in suits and with lawyers and that kind of stuff. So we took, for example, the water minister out on country to Robinvale with Uncle Brendan from Tatty Tatty and had her by the swamp, which is really unhealthy at the moment. Just to really get her to feel what's happening out on country and away from the boardroom or the CBD. So that's an example of trying to flip the hearing space. But yeah, I think about our community and the 1,500 voices that we've heard give evidence so far. And just to the last speakers in as well around giving evidence, I think it's on safety. So you need the participant to feel safe to share and want to share a story. And you need to make it accessible. I think they're the two things for me that you need to make people feel safe and accessible to share stories. So our biggest or creative way that we received evidence from community members was through a supported submission process. So it was quite a complex thing to set up in the first probably 6 months, but we had some SUB support, so social and emotional wellbeing support from a separate body, so that their records weren't part of the official public record and the PROV database. So like an out-of-house SUB support member available. We had a legal support team, so we created a thing called LOCHBA with Victorian Legal Aid and Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, a combined free legal support for people giving evidence because, you know, I'm not a lawyer, but some of the things around what you can and can't say to protect yourself, it's important to give people clarity on that, or to run things like a transcript run that by a lawyer. So we had a legal support, we had SUB support, and probably the most important thing was we had 7 Aboriginal truth receivers. So they were based out in the region from Shepparton to Gippsland to Warrnambool, in Melbourne as well. Would get on the road, would be that first point of call with a community member who would make an inquiry, would build that trust, you know, talk about who they are and their mob and their story. And then those initial catch-ups might be on the phone, it might be on Zoom, it might be over 7 or 8 cups of tea. And then if they're comfortable and they want the SUB support, they want the legal support, we get to the stage of taking evidence. And look, I'll be honest, when I would do my kind of fortnightly reports to commissioners around, submission numbers and evidence gathering, there was times when they would kind of quiz Brent, we're not getting many evidence, we're not getting much submissions, what's going on? And I had to remind them of the process, and at times got commissioners involved in doing one or two of those processes just to see, I think leaders should always be involved on the ground at times to see what it's like as an operational process. And they appreciated that we were doing it the right way. So I think, submissions by the river with a dictaphone so people could talk, and then it could be just transcribed for lawyers to look over and make sure it was okay before we submit. Do people want to publish their submission? Do they not want to publish their submission? We had, and this is pretty common in Royal Commissions, 35% of our submissions came in the last 3 months. So we were pretty short-staffed in that period, but we knew that we'd built a lot of trust as a Yurok organisation. We'd had a lot of key kind of elders and community members give evidence, and they hold significant weight in the community around trusts. That was really important. And I think the thing from there is I mentioned treaties happening at a statewide level. In a media release at the start of the year, one of the 4 or 5 commitments from the Assembly and the government was ongoing truth telling. So, we were really grateful to do this truth telling thing in 4 years and understand the importance of it, but we're not going to hear everyone's truth, right? That's not possible. We weren't resourced to do that. So truth telling has to ongo and has to live on. It's going to be an ongoing thing later this year. I'm really proud to say, as a kind of director of community engagement, we met with over 20 traditional owner groups on country for roundtables of evidence. So they were recorded on their country, with support that was needed, plenty of pre-yarns. But we did those yarning circles with traditional owners around colonisation, around recognition schemes that are currently in place, around some of the positive things that are happening with Care for Country, and then what are their aspirations for treaty. So we did that over a 5-month period, and then that gave us the evidence before we kind of grilled the Premier or the Minister for Environment or different ministers around land. So we had the evidence from community that our council could go to those significant bureaucrats with. So that was really important. And then I think, a lot of these things are time resource heavy, but really important, and so good to get out. But sometimes it's just about, some people want to be online and do a submission. Some people want to share poems, as Annika said. So we had Uncle Jim Berg, a prominent Gunditjmara Eastern Maar leader. His son's the co-chair of the Assembly, Ruben, at the moment. On the website, we've got some of his poems around colonisation. So a nice way to share some significant stories or some horrific stories. The late Uncle Archie Roach used to sing about the children being taken, but it's another way that probably doesn't re-traumatise people telling their story. And we've got a bunch of Uncle Jim's scar trees on our website as well, and they're in our office that he shared around, caring for country. So that was a real big focus. I wish we could do more around art and sharing art as well as what that can be for a way to share evidence. And then you think about your young people. So I've talked about elders and, traditional owners, but young people, we've got a massive young population of Aboriginal people, which is great that people feel safer to identify and learn from elders. And we had some mini submissions or QR codes, so different ways that people at events or community gatherings could share their truth in probably a less formal and timely approach, which is really important to connect with the young mob as well. So there are different ways that we gathered evidence. I think they all hold their own weight. And I think the takeaway that we reflect on a lot is sometimes it was really healing for people to tell their story for the first time, or to have it on the official public record that their family can read their story if they pass. So there's different things like that. And then obviously I'll talk about probably later on around how stories can help shift some systems and what might stand out and different media moments and those kind of things. And I suppose challenges, Annika, you mentioned challenges like just timing and resourcing, to be honest. Like, I think we did the things the right way, but 40 odd staff, a team of 8 community engagement staff members in a 3.5-year window. Our letters patent was to look at everything from colonisation to now. So that was really challenging for us, but I think we went about it the right way. It was just the resourcing. So I think that ongoing truth telling that's going to happen later in the year will be a positive.
Yeah, and as you're describing all the effort there, Brent, to allow people to tell stories their way, where they want to, as well as how they want to, what Abdul Rahman was saying about, there is no story without the storyteller really rings true, and all of the investment and time into making sure the stories that were shared were in a way where the storyteller had agency. That's really inspiring. Um, Abdul Rahman, I wonder if you could speak to us specifically about the theatre of the oppressed and how you use that particular medium. I'm just really curious in dealing with really thorny issues like polarization, or where there are people with conflicting beliefs or identities that are creating friction. So, or how what role does theatre allow as a storytelling medium?
Yeah, thank you for that invitation, um, Annika. When I became in my previous life, I was a high school history and drama teacher for about 5 years in suburban Toronto, and my first job, I was hired to be, a history and social studies teacher, and they offered me the job, and then she kind of sheepishly said, "But you're going to have to teach drama once every term," and they thought that I would resist, but in fact, I was really happy because at Teachers College, I had tried to take a drama teachable, but because I didn't have any English or theater experience during my undergraduate studies, I wasn't allowed to. But the real joy and serendipity of becoming a drama teacher was the two teachers who I worked with, who became very close friends and mentors of mine, were both students of Augusto Boal directly, and they would spend time with Augusto when he would come to the United States and Canada back in the 1980s and 90s. The theater of the oppressed, for myself and for us as a collective, has been a really important part of the work that we do. And it is around the idea of embodied storytelling. So I'm going to answer the question in two parts. One is that I think it's important for us to think about methods of storytelling beyond, of course, words. We understand storytelling in art and in sculpture and visual art. And of course, we understand storytelling, and particularly all of you who work with and are from Indigenous communities understand that storytelling is also embodied. And this idea that narrative is expressed through movement, sensation, and presence, that narrative is affective, and in affective narrative, in narrative that relies and communicates feeling, emotion, that those aren't surface level things, those are deep things, as you were speaking about, Michelle. Those are the depth of who we are, and I think that is in a way what Boal and the school of the theater of the oppressed really leaned into, was how do we how do we unleash ourselves as storytellers and engage in story, but also engage in story that deeply engages with the political and economic and social fractures around us in a way that doesn't privilege solutioneering, but it privileges the process towards which we towards getting to a place which is not a solution, but is a collaboration in dealing with these fractures. And so often, theater of the oppressed has become called, it's the practice, Boal said, right? It was the rehearsal for the revolution. It was our opportunity to engage with really difficult issues in a space that was brave and risky, but that forced each of us to lean into one another's story. So, Annika, one of the things that you learn, the first thing you learn when you go into kind of a theater of the oppressed training, is that everyone is an actor and a spectator at the same time. And so Boal, in a very simple way, called it the spectator, that we're always observing and performing and engaging. And not only that, it recognizes our right to not only listen, but our agency to perform and to transform the realities that we're in. And I think the possibility of theater of the oppressed, and I'll give you a very specific example, is the ability to transform a reality that we are experiencing, and to do so in collaboration with others in the hopes of seeing possibility, but also in that possibility to communicate who we are in an embodied way. And so Boal would often speak about dialogue over prescription, for instance, that the goal isn't to get to that prescription. Once again, story is not utilitarian. We don't tell stories in order to have a prescription at the end of it that says, here's your solution. That's not why we're doing this. We tell stories because we're human. We embody this practice because we're human. And it is our collaboration as human beings that we seek to find solutions together.
I think that's a theme that's coming up in a few of these circles where if we see storytelling as just a tool or as, something that's utilitarian to get us to an outcome, we're really underestimating their power and their importance to us as humans, really. And I think what I love about what you've just clarified for us, Abdul Rahman, is that it's not about getting to a solution. It's actually about creating the conditions as a collective where solutions might emerge. So using
Exactly.
storytelling as that bridging mechanism to connect us into something deeper than ourselves, and then in creating those conditions, you might actually find the path forward. As always happens in these sessions, and when you get a group of interesting people together, where time is flying, and so I might move on to the last question to link these forms of storytelling to helping shift systems. And I think, what you've just set up, Abdul Rahman, is a perfect segue because, in one way that storytelling in different mediums one way that storytelling using different mediums can shift systems is by changing the underlying conditions. You use a certain kind of storytelling, you build deeper collaboration between groups who might not agree, and then you create the space for new solutions to emerge. Michelle, I'm really interested in your view on how different ways of telling stories can help shift systems, and particularly in your work, seeing people who are often trapped in systems and just the link between the ways that they might tell their own stories or the stories of the system and how that can be used to kind of instigate change. Really interested in your views.
Sure. Thank you, Annika. And thank you, Brent and Emma and Abdul Rahman. It's lovely to be amongst you all and feel the similarities in our work from different points of view. I think I want to go to the ways in which narrative ways of working offers the shaping of people's stories to help shift systems. And so just briefly, the use of therapeutic documentation where we might work with people who are moving through court systems or welfare mob, referred to in the NT, child protection relationships and impacts, that these, conversations can fade, but the words in a letter don't, and they don't disappear. And so people can hold letters in their hands, reading and rereading it each day. And it's a way of reminding people what they've endured, how far they have advanced in their lives, and the extent to which change has occurred by recording particular knowledges that a person needs to have available to them at times of crisis, and particularly in crisis. It's so easy for us to forget what we are always seeking, which is a more preferred identity, which is actually not prescribed for us, but one that we actually strive for and find agency to own. Another way that we use a lot is outsider witness practices, where a person speaks about their story. There are sincere witnesses listening in, and those witnesses are then supported to offer what they heard, what they felt, what they might do differently in response to the person sharing their particular story. Barbara Wingard is a narrative practitioner who is deceased, and her family have given permission for her images and work to continue to be spoken about. And she has influenced my work very much. She spoke about telling our stories as Aboriginal people, telling our stories in ways that make us stronger. Because part of the challenge of life for many Aboriginal people that I work with is such a disconnect through decolonisation and other influences, and the burdensome impact of systems, that if we're reminded of our strong stories and we keep telling them and we keep hearing ourselves tell them, then we develop a kind of grounded strength, and we can work together to use metaphor and to undertake remembering practices of people that have gone before us, to think about reauthoring our own stories, to find ways to walk towards our preferred identity, and holding space for alternative stories to emerge. I've seen this in my work. I've seen it in my work in the youth justice system in the Northern Territory, where in small yet important ways, working with children from the age of 10 who are incarcerated, most of them awaiting sentence on remand, and most of them in the care of the child protection system in the Northern Territory, being supported to think about what agency they can take in that situation, and then describing that in song, prose, recorded voice, written word, and sending those communications to the people that make decisions on behalf of children in detention. Another area is the domestic and family violence, where many women engage in writing letters to a problem story. Finally, I think the collective work that narrative practitioners undertake can really kind of prick the ears of stubborn systems, because it's not just one person's experience, it's the experience of a collective. Recently, we worked with a group of women around narrative metaphor Tree of Life, and ways in which we, women of Tennant Creek, grow up strong children our way. And the result of that was a letter to the town mayor about wanting him to think about more green space, more places for children's playgrounds. A letter to a couple of organisations in town that just persist in finding it difficult to find other ways of working together for women and children and their families. And the response has been very positive. So that's a fresh, exciting example of people coming together as a collective, being supported to think about in the context of third world conditions and disadvantage and poverty, how to shape terribly destructive events into narratives of hope.
Yeah,
Which is a gift of narrative ways of working.
that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Michelle. And it's a beautiful place to end the panel. There's just so much more to unpack, and we'll certainly send around more about each of the panelists' work in the post reading. We might take a break for a couple of minutes. I know normally we're much more generous, but maybe for just a couple of minutes, and then to come back at 1:05, and yeah, and then we'll move into using a really specific tool and a specific form of photography as a way of telling stories. And Natalie from Focal will take us through that. I just want to give everyone a chance to just stretch their legs, and I know that Yeah, some people might have to drop off, but I just wanted to say a big, big, big thank you to Brent, Michelle, Emma, and Abdurrahman for joining us from all over in a busy time, and just to say again, your work is just so inspiring, and we're really privileged to have heard about the ways you've used story. So thank you so much to our panel and everyone else who are joining us for the Toolkit Skill Sets and Mindset segment. If you can come back at 1:05, and then I'll pass along to Natalie. Thanks very much, everyone.